is from Tithi Bhattacharya, who is a feminist scholar based in the States, who, again, I think I listened to a webinar with her about a month ago, and this line from her really stuck with me. It's what if life and life making become the basis of a social organization? And what this is like particularly talking about is like, what if we're not motivated by profit? What if we're not motivated by making things? A lot of innovative technology comes out of the military, it comes out of kind of the desire to assert power. What if actually it comes out of making life? And then my last one kind of sort of connects to that a little bit. At the start of this research, I did quite a lot of desk research, and one of the things I read was this report by 3 academics at the Kinsey Institute, and they had done a qualitative study of people who use dating apps, and they had found out a very important thing, which you will find out when my slide moves on. Right, hang on, no, sorry about this, because this is an important slide to look at. Basically, the thing is that people have more sex when they use emojis in dating chats, and so when people are trying to connect and make relationships, the first thing that they saw by looking at how people use Match.com is that people who use emojis more often have more dates. They were able to transmit something about their personalities, their intimacy, in a very different way to people who were kind of thinking very hard about the words they were saying. And then over time, as people were chatting, they tended to then spend more time together and go on more dates and potentially have sex when they use more emoji. And I absolutely do not want to pair the idea of intimacy as having to be related to sex at all, but it's more that what I'm really interested in here is that in this world where all these barriers between us, there are screens, there are cameras, there are all these complicated things, there are little techniques and sparks and completely different things that we're able to do that can bring us together more quickly, that can get around that dead-eyed stare. And I'm now going to stop sharing my screen because this is obviously not working and hand over to Gill, who can take you into the next bit.
Beautiful. Great. Thanks for amazing tech support. So in real life, we would be in the most gorgeous space where we had lots of lights, really comfy chairs. We would have big walls full of space for us to put our thoughts onto. We will have started to chat to each other as we had gone to got a drink or picked up a biscuit or a snack. So if you could imagine that we've done all that, that would really help with compensate for the limitations of Zoom. Or in the very least, we would have sent you a little care package to share this morning while we were doing this event with worksheets and lovely things. However, you're in your great homes and that's perfect. So what we're going to do for the next section is we've sort of pulled out 3 themes that we'd love you to explore with all of your brilliance. And we're going to pop you into groups for about half an hour, but there's a little structure to it, of course. We're going to ask you to explore, well, obviously say hello to each other in a beautifully brief way, please. We're going to ask you to look at 2 questions that you'll get. So each group will get a brief. Your brief will be posted in the chat. Of course, if you've got any problems with with reading that, maybe someone can repost it for everybody. What we're going to do, we know that Zoom is a hard environment to do this in, so we're going to ask you just to help each other a little to make this a little bit easier. For those that find it really difficult, if you could post your questions to each other or help each other make this work. We're going to ask you to, if it works for you, in each group to have a facilitator, someone who's going to at least keep things moving. You may want someone to share taking notes, maybe a couple of people, so it's not one person. We'll give you a Google Doc link in the brief, so you can post what you're thinking. That would be great. And then we'd like someone to feed back at the end of that half an hour at 1 o'clock. So we don't necessarily need everything. It will be really great to get a couple of top lines about what you're thinking, or a few recommendations that you think really should happen as action. So you'll see in the questions, one is about the theme, and the other one will be about what would that look like if we actually had that in place, some of the thinking that you're doing. So we'd like you to project a little bit into this. Rachel and I will be popping in if we can make it all work, and we'll come and say hi. And please, if anyone's got any problems, if you find it's a conversation you don't want to be part of, come out and we'll put you in another group. You don't have to stay there, and no one will be offended if you leave. Okay. Indy, are you ready? Okay. You're going to be invited to join a breakout room. Please click on that. There'll be some instructions in the chat for you, so please open up chat when you get there. We have 25 minutes to hear back from the group, and as requested, it would be really fantastic if you could just give us a little highlight of the kinds of things you were talking about, and then we can round up with a few thoughts from folk in the ending of the session.
Hi, Meg Lightheart, she, her. So we had a conversation about how you come into the Zoom and how you leave the Zoom. We ended up showing our environments at the prompting of one of, I think it was Letitia, who said something about seeing what else was happening around us, and we started off showing the acceptable parts of our environment and then ended up showing the bits that we hide as well. So like I showed the beautiful view out of my garden and onto my garden, and then I showed my unmade bed on the other side. And then just in those few minutes, like we suddenly felt this real different, because we were exploring intimacy. I don't know that we had any more specific questions than that. It just said your topic is building intimacy, so that's what we explored. We talked about how intimacy can grow, and then if the person who runs the meeting ends the meeting for all, how that can feel like it breaks the intimacy. And we were also talking about whether you have yourself, whether you can see yourself or you turn self-view off, and what that does in terms of your ability to feel connected to the group or not. And then Zaz was talking about a specific experience they had with someone yesterday whose background was, Zaz, do you want to tell us?
Yeah, I'm Zaz, by the way, they, them. My name is Daniel here, which is my actual name. But yesterday, I saw someone who had a background from a game called Animal Crossing, and I love that game, like I play it all the time. So I messaged them and I was like, oh my gosh, your background is amazing. And I was taking screenshots of the session as I was hosting, and I got this perfect screenshot of when they read the message, and there was this huge smile on their face that went from like quite serious, this huge smile. And then actually they messaged back saying, oh my gosh, yeah, like I love it too. And then I sent them my friend tag, and now we're just like friends on like Nintendo Switch. And just that like probably wouldn't have happened because I wouldn't, if we were in the physical space together, because I wouldn't have known that they loved Animal Crossing as much as I do. So yeah, that was pretty awesome.
So part of that came out of like talking about how there's different types of intimacy we might have, whereas if we were in a room, you wouldn't see, like Jill showed us her washing up, and like you wouldn't see different parts of people, and how our different experiences of what feels intimate and not grows up. And also with people we're already intimate with, how phone calls can be good sometimes, but also when you see their face, like your heart really opens because you're like, oh my God, you're here. So a lot of what we're talking about was the addition of video.
Thanks so much, Meg and Danny. Who would like to go next? I'm thinking, let's go for the group that Charles was in, which we now know is group 4.
Hello. Thank you. We got there in the end. Yeah, so I think we talked about quite a few different things, but I'll just go through a few of the things we noted down. One thing Elizabeth shared is how Extinction Rebellion, I think, calls and meetups have been using hand signals as a way to sort of make conversation between large numbers of people work really well. And so I don't know if Elizabeth, if you wanted to demo any, but I know we had this, and this means, is it sort of agreeing? Yeah.
I can chip in for you, right?
Thank you.
I mean, we started off in person, but obviously we've been using them for Zoom signals and for Zoom trainings and things. They're universal throughout XR. Everyone uses them. This is agreement, so like a twinkling thing. This is I would like to speak. Obviously all groups are facilitated, so there'll be a facilitator watching for this, or watching for the Zoom hand coming up. And it's the facilitator's job to make sure that the quieter voices in the room are able to speak as well, and that nobody dominates the conversation. And if they go on too long, we have that sign, which works a lot better in real life than it does on Zoom, which means round up, round up. That means speak up. What else do we have? A point, that is a direct point, so that means you go to the top of the queue for the facilitator, which of course can be abused. What else do we do? Clarification. There's quite a lot of them, but they're very, very helpful, and with a good facilitator they can work beautifully. So I also noticed that on Zoom we have been using across all sorts of global gatherings the Namaste sign a lot. We've been using heart signs, and we've been using that sign as well, which is a sort of I feel you sort of thing. Okay, I've back to Charles.
No, I think another thing we were talking about is, I guess, for smaller groups, whether it's important to know people's sort of situation when they're in a call. I guess particularly when everyone's having an opportunity to talk. Whether they similar to the what's your environment. Are the people around you? Are you comfortable to talk? Do you need to go and do something midway through, and just to let people whether or not we even need to let people know about that, and for everyone to sort of know where you're starting from. And I think something that I realized towards the end as well is how I've been doing Zoom calls for quite a few years now, and it's very comfortable and easy, I find it, but well, fairly easy, not that easy, but a lot, you forget that actually a lot of people will be starting from completely different starting points and levels of comfort, or and all that sort of stuff. So how hands-on they actually want to be with it, and how much help they might need to actually get started and know the etiquette that a particular group might be using. Even if it's like the hand signals or other stuff. So making sure everyone's on the same page and having a facilitator really helps with that. Also, we also mentioned when stuff goes wrong, having someone to de-escalate a problem if it suddenly goes wrong and everyone's left with their hands in the air not knowing what to do, having someone who's able to just take control of the situation and sort things out and take a step back. I think that's pretty much everything we had.
Great,
and looking at cameras is important.
Yes.
Sorry.
Fantastic. Thank you. So we've had group 2 and group 4. What about group 5?
Oh, I was going to say group 3. I just wanted to say, in the chat, I think some people are having some problems with the Google Doc.
Right, I'm just trying to work out the permissions. I thought the link would work. I'll get on that.
Okay, thanks.
Fantastic. Someone from group 5 or?
Yeah, I'm in.
Fantastic.
Hiya. So our question was about how do we help our communities grow safely and respectfully. And so we talked a lot about how we identify people who may be missing. We were looking at it really from a COVID perspective initially, in terms of people who are kind of lost in that weird space between physical community and digital community, and how we might be able to sort of lean into those groups a little bit. And then from that, sort of using smaller groups, community groups that sort of exist to try and navigate how we can sort of facilitate between those people. And we talked a lot about how digital space often doesn't have the same kind of frameworking as other kind of community groups. So talking about kind of agreed rules, consent, and sort of the notion of like co-designing rules. So if you have a WhatsApp group, actually having a little bit of a framework as to what you can and can't post in that space, and maybe also even setting out boundaries for time and that kind of thing. And whether that kind of allows that digital space to become a bit safer for people who are feeling a little bit more anxious in terms of engagement, but also being very accepting of the fact that some people won't engage because it's not their space, and how we kind of keep the facilitation between the digital and the physical. And then we sort of talked a little bit about how we could use that kind of these like smaller bubbles and more tailored spaces to look at like whether we would consider scaling that, or if it's a case of like starting to sort of create connection between those bubbles, and then how you roll that out into technology. So maybe you start to look at whether technology needs to change a little bit in terms of maybe sort of stripping back some of the reward systems that exist within in the technology that we're using, and whether that sort of helps to create a sort of safer, more community-led kind of space as well. So yeah, we got through quite a bit. But yeah. And also the other thing we did actually quickly say as well is that maybe actually by having things like Animal Crossing, where you're not actually trying to replicate real life and kind of do a half version of something that you usually do, but actually creating a new space in digital space is actually a really valuable tool to allow kind of like people to access it. So yeah, that was us.
Fantastic, Fiona. Thank you so much. Brilliant. Can we hear from group 3, please? Is that you, Rachel?
Yes, hello. So we actually, I think we're all probably really relaxed, because one of the things that we talked about was silence and the importance of the silence. And we spent our last half a minute being totally silent on the Zoom. And one of the things that I learned from that is once you create the rule and make it okay, then actually that's a very sort of invigorating and health-giving thing. But when you don't think it's okay, it's quite oppressive and overwhelming. And so, and I think just an important thing to bring up is, like we were talking about how in the real world, no one would be in a room being expected to look at each other one way the whole time in a single vision, staring each other out, right? But that's what happens on video calls. And the other, I think, big thing that we talked about was about, there's a really nice phrase from Karina, designing your alliance. And so being really clear on the rules and the terms of engagement, how to encourage each other, not to be in a place where everyone is constantly looking for signals, but to know what those are and to be explicit about those and to make rules and be intentional about creating the space. And I think one more thing I would just add is we were talking about how actually, I think picking up on Meg's point, picking up on Meg's point, like, actually, we are at home, you know, or often we're in a place that we have chosen to be in to have a conversation, and how actually that's a good thing, and it's maybe empowering, and we can maybe draw power out of that in ways that maybe we wouldn't do otherwise. And that's it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rachel. Brilliant. Now, could we hear from group 1, please?
I think I wasn't sure what group I was in for a long time, but I think by default, I now realise I'm in group 1 by process of elimination. So I guess some of the interesting things that I thought we chatted about, we started off, one of the people in our room was talking about a new bike loaning scheme, which was coming out in London, which were loaning the bike was free and was going to be paid for by adverts, really. So we talked about ourselves being commodities. And again, another colleague talked about how Zoom asked them to share their calendar and stuff like that. So it was a really interesting point in terms of, you know, the technology that we're using. Again, as it was inferred in the question, is that to serve us or is that to serve other people's needs, and how can that impact on how we're able to use it? One of the other interesting things was we talked a lot about the, you know, I'm from the, I work in the NHS, and a lot of the Zoom communication I have is very formal and standard, and we're trying to replicate, as other people have said, what we've done in the real world and try and make that work here. Other people were talking about some amazing creative stuff that has been done, and how people have used it in a far more creative way. And as a starting point, we have a new medium here and not trying to replicate the real world, and how that's created a lot of, I think there was an example of how people were kind of sharing stories or requests. So we were talking about the different rhythms as well. I think one of the points one of our colleagues said was a mixture of interventions and rhythms, and how we utilize both, you know, some of that more formal stuff where you do only have 5 minutes to talk and exchange ideas, with some of the more intimate and creative stuff where you might share stories or set lists and what have you, and how trying to curate all those different rhythms might help us develop and grow, rather than expecting us to live in one of those worlds or the other. And I think, I don't know if anyone else in my group wants to add anything that I might have missed from our discussions.
I think that thanks, Lenny. Thanks for reporting back. We didn't really decide on who was going to be our spokesperson in the plenary. I think you've summed up really well. The couple of things that like really stayed with me, I think, were I guess about I suppose appropriating the tools and trying to bring those tools together, the commercial tools that are on offer, and trying in a way to poach some space or cobble together the tools that we need from the commercial tools that are on offer, and how we might kind of appropriate them for and invent some different purposes for them that the companies that have made them and are trying to commercialize them might not have intended. And one of the ways I suppose we might poach some space or appropriate them is actually to provide some ways to connect and bring together kind of communities, or to find some solidarity, or intimacy even in these times of physical distancing. And then, so partly about kind of appropriating, and then, I think there was an interesting conversation really about kind of not attempting to kind of replicate, but to find uses for these tools that might differ from, in a way that acknowledging that they're not going to replace face-to-face assembly and coming together in the way that we're more familiar with and might be missing, but there might be other opportunities that they might offer, and some of those opportunities are things that we can learn from, for instance, about how we might connect internationally and in ways that are perhaps more sustainable.
Brilliant, Paul and Lenny, thank you very much for pulling that together. What about group number 6? Or anybody who hasn't been yet. There's 2 more groups. I know that. Have we heard back from everybody? I didn't think so. I thought there was 2 more groups. If that's it, is that everybody?
I think it must be. Unless there's anyone who's had just such a terrible time, they're thinking, oh my God, I'm not going to talk anymore.
I'm not talking to anybody about this.
I hope not.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to pick up on something that came up a couple of times, which is Animal Crossing, and to really like promote the idea of like there's loads of social theory about how having a third object, like doing an activity together that is fun, is the thing that builds community more than anything else, rather than looking each other in the eye on video, right? It's actually, you know, productively making a thing or having fun or appreciating things together. And I hope something that comes out of this time is maybe we might begin to appreciate some of the things that may have been thought to be more trivial might become, I don't know, more important. So I just wanted to mention that.
I was really struck when I moved into a group that was talking about intimacy, that we ended up sharing our rooms and our messy beds and our washing up piles. I mean, it's significant. I'm not going to share it with everybody. But how we could get there so quickly was just really, really stunning. So I think there's something about tuning in to those moments when that's possible. And I mean, there's a hell of a lot of trust as well that everyone's given us today, which I really, really appreciate, as well as your participation, which has been tremendous. Let's say if anyone's got any thoughts or reflections or anything they want to capture before we finish the session, we've got 2 more minutes. Please just unmute. And
one small observation from yesterday, Imi speaking with the thunderstorm happening that was also happening in my location was really interesting.
wow.
It was beautiful. It was really nice. Just be like, yeah, what a lovely thunderstorm we're having. And then there's other people who are obviously not experiencing it at all, but it was like, I know what's going on in Imi's environment a little bit more than
I just want to come back to that as well, because the other thing is when I knew that all the people in Birmingham were saying that the weather was just doing, because it really did go from 0 to 100, and people who knew me knew that at that time I was simultaneously hosting this thing to like 300 people, and completely terrified that the storm was going to destroy the internet and just throw the whole like conference out. So people got in touch with me to be like, I can hear the rain, I can hear the thunder, and I know that you're really worried right now that everything's about to go down, but I'm just telling you we can hear you fine. And it was just, there was the intimacy of that was so nice, because it's you know, it's just isolating, and sometimes you can't be bothered to type into the Slack that you're really worried about this thing, and and that happening was really nice. So yeah, Tom, thanks for that.
Brilliant. Elizabeth?
Just to pick up on what Tom said, I was at a gathering a couple of weeks ago, the Wilds Beyond Climate Justice, and there were a lot of people from the States there. And they were sharing pictures from their, literally just turning their cameras around so we could see the rioting that was going on outside, and you could hear the sirens and things. It was really very powerful for people in other parts of the world who were not going through that experience. And it really, I'm feeling goosebumps as I'm talking about it. It was so powerful.
I think you're sharing the goosebumps as well, Elizabeth. It transmits in powerful ways. That's our time. Thank you so much for participating in this. It's been a total delight. We're continuing on this project anyway, and you'll see components of it on the web and in all sorts of places. But that's it from me. Thank you very much, and thanks Indy for tremendous backstage tech support, without which this would not have happened. Rachel, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to say.
Just want to check that everyone has been able to post their notes, and I would really like to. There are various things that I've heard that have come up that I would like to use in our write-up subsequently, and I'm just wondering if anybody would like, I don't know, if you're uncomfortable about something you have said that you don't want on the record, not that there's going to be a transcript of this, but if you're unhappy, what would be great is, I don't quite know how to do this, but if you either let me know in the chat now, or maybe one of the team, because maybe it's going to get a bit complicated otherwise. But thank you. It's been absolutely lovely. I was quite nervous because I felt like we were coming to do a thing we didn't quite know what it was, and I think it's been brilliant. So thank you, everyone.